What's up, everybody? This is the third episode of the Attunement Podcast. I'm Harry. This is Samek, and we're going to get into what we learned on our spiritual and emotional journeys this week.
Yeah. We're going to get started with Harry this time. And Harry went on a retreat, a journey retreat. So the questions will be just like the first curiosity I have around it is, how was the retreat for you?
And just the retreat was with Jhourney, Jhourney with a JH. For people listening, it was a Jhana meditation retreat, which is a form. It's a lot of things, but basically it's a form of loving kindness meditation. So I wasn't like concentrating all week. I was like, oh, I like my dog a lot. I was like, oh, I really like my dog a lot. I was like, oh, I like myself a lot. And it was like that. And it was still hard. It's still hard to do nothing for 7 days in a certain sense. But now to answer your question, there are so many possible frames I could put on it. It's kind of crazy. I could tell you it sucked, and I could tell you it was the best experience of my life. And I could tell you I knew everything already, and I could tell you everything is different. And those are all kind of true. But then I guess it's just, what do I actually want to say about it? This is only day 3 after the retreat, and I'm realizing that it has impacted me more than I expected. And I think that will continue to be true. And I just had a view conversation with our friend, who I will not name. I literally just, when I do view conversations, I have a question. It's normally like, how do I watch YouTube less? Or like, how do I enjoy cooking more? Or whatever. How do I set better boundaries? Today, the question was just, what's my question? And then I just cried for 20 minutes.
Oh, beautiful.
And it was dope. And that thing's new for me to want to talk about. But it was like, damn, I've been fighting for that for a long time. And now it's here.
Is this the freedom of crying, or what is the thing you were fighting for?
I see it, but I actually don't want to talk about it because it's not because it's like, it's interesting because it's not vulnerable in a way that like I'd be embarrassed. It's vulnerable in a way which is like,
It's still alive. Like it's still fighting process.
I'm still processing it, and so I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy about it. And I can tell you more about that, but I'll pause there.
Yeah. I'm curious about like doing the journey retreat itself. Like, how was the first few days for you? I feel like going into the retreat, the first few days are the hardest every time I've done a retreat. So I'm curious about your experience.
Yeah, for me, the first, 8 hours, like almost all of day 1 was the initial hardest period. And it was just like, there's a lot of tension, and there was a lot of enduring, and there was a lot of being like, this is actually really enjoyable, but 5% of me wants to get out of this. Like, can't wait for the meditation to be over. And it fucking pisses me off that 5% of me wants this to be over when like 95% of me is just like, I fucking love my dog. So good. So that was hard, but that part actually only lasted the first day. And then my last meditation on the first day, I think, was the first time on that retreat that I got into Jhana. For people listening, getting into Jhana can sound very esoteric, but if you imagine like the most fun you've ever had dancing, or now that will be confusing. I'd say what I would go for is the most fun you've ever had dancing. And if you like if you were also in a meditative state and you felt what your body felt like, the most fun you've ever had dancing, it's kind of like that. So it's pretty nice. But not like inhuman, not completely out of the ordinary. And in that last meditation on that day, I was like, oh, that part of me, which I associate with this tension in the back of my neck, that like, it's like, oh, this is really fun, but I kind of want it to be over anyway. It's kind of too intense for me, or I kind of just want to leave. Things are different. I don't like it. I was like, oh, I can look there. I have this thing where it's like, I had an assumption before that sometimes I would not be self-conscious, but as soon as I noticed I was not being self-conscious, then I lose because I'm being self-conscious again. And so I was like, oh, I'm not self-conscious right now. Like, I don't need to escape the moment. And I'm noticing that. And that's not making me self-conscious. I was like, whoa. So then I had like, I'd say like 3 days. The next 3 days were like pretty nice. And then it was closer to the end of the retreat. And then I was like, oh, I want to watch YouTube at the end of the retreat. And then I was like escaping and enduring. But still, it was only that first day where it's like, fuck, like, oh, can this just be over? And like days 4 through 7, there was a part of me that was like, can this be over? But like, I had more space and capacity to hold it. So I was like, oh, there's the part of me that is like, can this be over? Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm curious about the jhanas. I've done a lot of jhana meditation, also metta meditation myself. I did like retreats with Dhammasukha, and it was always fun to go up the jhana. So I was curious about how it was your progression, learning to go deeper into states of jhana meditation.
Feel free to double down on your question after this, but one of my favorite things I got out of the retreat, and right, there's so many different depths of the jhanas, like, right, like jhana, there's 8 jhanas in how they were teaching me, and the 4th jhana is like this deep peace and stillness. And I experienced a certain version of that. I'm sure there's a really deep version of that for some monk, for many monks out there, that like I would love maybe more than any experience I've had in my life. But the flavor and depth of jhanas that I experienced, I think 1 through 6 on this retreat, day 5, day 5, I started subtly efforting and subtly pushing myself, which led me to subtly, like very subtly, burn out and want to stop having an object of meditation, wanting to stop focusing on the loving-hearted feeling in my chest and the open-hearted feeling in my chest, and rather just like sit there and do nothing, or sit there and be myself, or sit there and be with myself, which aren't inherently contradictory, but because of the way in which I was efforting, they felt inherently contradictory on day 5, like day 5 through day 7. And what I'm getting at is, can you ask your question again?
Yeah, how was your experience of going into deeper states of jhana?
Yes. And so it was day 5 or day 7. It was day 7. Oh man. On day 7, I did my first sitting meditation instead of lying down. But more importantly, I was like, I'm just going to sit down and be myself. And I was like, oh, this is I was like, oh, this is better than all of the jhanas. Yeah, so that was pretty awesome. And getting to see the jhanas to get to that place, like, wow, I can experience these like really intense, extraordinary, peaceful, contented experiences, pleasurable experiences, and still after that, like, just being myself is like kind of clearly preferable. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah, beautifully put. I had the same experience. Like I think January, February of 2024, I would like constantly be meditating, constantly trying to tap into like a light first or second jhana, where it's just like this pleasurable bliss feeling. And then I just like, it just started feeling wrong. It was like this like mask of happiness and joy and pleasure that I was putting on the experience of reality that's already so beautiful, and a mask on who I am, or what emotion, what feeling, what wants to show up for me right now. And then having gone through the process of being able to access these like states of intense pleasure and happiness, and seeing that it's not like the thing that I always want, but instead just like a little, like a part of me.
Yeah.
Kind of like made being myself a lot easier, and also like made chasing after those states a lot less like prevalent in my life.
Yeah, and makes me think of two things. One, at least the journey, the people I did the retreat with, they describe jhana states as non-addictive, and in my experience, that's pretty true, or that's like extremely true. I think one can get a little bit addicted to chasing a jhana, but I think it's very hard to get addicted to actually being in jhana. And I saying that right now, I'm like, oh, the thing I was pushing myself on was not being in jhana. It was trying to be in the next jhana. But when I look at that, it's just like, I'm losing it, but it's going to come back. I believe you're talking about being yourself. I'm losing it, whatever. But to the extent that it's like genuinely non-addictive, then that means, in my opinion, that it's just genuinely nourishing. And it means that if I'm in that nourishing state, as soon as I no longer need that form of nourishment, I'll just like go back to doing whatever else it is that I naturally want to do. And that like I will only be in that state as much as I naturally want to. Like the extent that water is non-addictive, you like drink it and it nourishes you. And when you're nourished with water, you like don't keep drinking it.
Yeah.
You only drink water when you want to, basically, when you genuinely want to. Assuming water is non-addictive.
Yeah.
And now I remember the second thing, which is like, it reminds me of want over should, which is like, sometimes I want to meditate and sometimes I want to be in the jhanas. And then sometimes I want to meditate and I want to just be myself. And sometimes I don't want to meditate at all. And sometimes I don't even want to be myself, whatever. But it's really like want over should is the fundamental thing, not any of those specific things. Because I think one thing I projected onto my experience in the past was like, oh, jhanas are inherently unwholesome. And jhanas are inherently slightly in conflict with me being my natural self. But it's like, no, on day 5 of that meditation retreat, I was relating to jhanas in a slightly unwholesome way that made me want to push them away so that I could re-find my genuine wants. And then my genuine wants were no longer to go to jhana. But like tomorrow, my genuine want might be to go into jhana. But it's like more about following my genuine want than it is whether or not I'm in jhana. Yeah.
Beautifully put. I want to ask more about, I remember you told me you had a few days where you did a lot of IFS with Claude.
Yeah.
And I want to ask more about that, but I'll wait until you ask me a question.
All right. So you want to switch and then we'll
Yeah.
switch. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, what are you most excited about having learned this week?
It's interesting because I feel like everything I learned this week is part of the same pattern that I have, and a lot of people have, of it goes back to your wants, and it also has something to do with agenda, like the agenda you have in life. Like something that I hear is like every sentence I say, everything I do has a want behind it. It's like, I want this and I'm doing this. I want to be understood and I want to be seen as intelligent. So I am talking in the way that I'm talking. And every time I'm conveying something or doing anything, there is an agenda present to move me to get a need met of some kind that I genuinely want.
Just checking when you say, so you And how you're modeling things, you're saying even the most genuine want, that's still, in the way you're talking about it now, that's still a form of an agenda, even if it's
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not moralizing agenda here.
Yeah,
It's
great.
just like agenda is like the thing I want to change the world so that I get something. And none of that has to be morally bad in any way.
And just checking that I understand, if you're like, I want to be myself in this moment by speaking, and it doesn't matter if anyone listens, is that you're still defining that as a form of agenda right now, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. I think like the cool insight I had was like people are fine. Like I'm fine with people's agenda. I'm fine with my own agenda when it's clear that the agenda is what it is. So it's like if I want something from someone else and I have an agenda to get the thing, I am fine with having that agenda. It doesn't feel manipulative. It doesn't feel bad as long as both people are aware of the agenda. And the less clarity there is on the agenda that's there, as in like I'm trying to get something from someone else and they don't know that I'm trying to get it from them, the more manipulative and bad it feels. And it also becomes a form of slight manipulation where like if you're not fully admitting your wants, like if I'm not fully admitting what I truly want in any interaction, in any situation, the less clarity I have for the agenda of what I'm doing, the more manipulative I'll become to get that want, even when the want isn't that bad. It's like, oh, I just want to interact with this person for a lot longer. Like I want to hang out with this person for a while longer, and then I feel like shame around admitting that I have that want. Then I'm gonna do like kind of sleazebaggy things to try to get to hang out with this person longer because I'm too scared to admit that I want this, and it's gonna come off as manipulative. The other person is gonna feel manipulative, and it is kind of manipulative. So
and for people listening, I'm like, can you give a really innocuous example, like a really blameless example of how people do this all the time in tiny ways, or how you do this all the time in tiny ways?
one way I do this tiny ways is like if I'm having a conversation with someone and like I'm not like interested in like the topic at hand, instead of saying, oh, it's like, oh, this doesn't feel alive for me anymore. Do you want to talk about something else? Going like, and not like really listening to them to try to get them to move on from the topic. There's like one like innocuous way where like I'm not owning my want of like wanting to talk about something else in a conversation. That's a very small innocuous way I do this. And then I feel like it's not a bad thing. It's like noticing that I'm not owning my agenda feels it's like something to be grateful for, because I'm always gonna have agendas that I don't fully notice, and admitting that I have an agenda requires not having shame around the agenda. So if I shame myself for even noticing it, like even noticing that I had the agenda, then I'm never gonna admit it in the first place.
So what's your agenda right now?
What's my agenda right now? I think like my agenda is like I want to come off as like intelligent. I want to come off as like, oh yeah, this insight is actually very useful for everyone listening to it. That's what I'm noticing, and it is insightful noticing, and it's actually helped me a lot over the past week. Where it's like, oh, what's my agenda right now? That exact question. It's so good. It's like, what's my agenda right now? And then like fully admitting it to myself makes life feel so much more smooth, and it feels so much more clean and open-hearted instead of like being slightly manipulative in whatever I'm coming off or doing, even to myself. Like I'm like manipulating myself to try to get something when I don't fully admit the thing I want.
My agenda is for you to be more in your head and bigger. And my agenda is for people to enjoy listening to this, and for my friends listening to it to send me nice WhatsApp messages and be like, I liked listening to that. And for all right, I'm going for it. My agenda is for us, by recording this podcast and like future podcasts, to become increasingly powerful in a way of like communicating loudly and wildly like the way we want to be, and like getting to attract the other people who also want to be that way with us, or like support us in being that way, or like-minded people.
Yeah. I'm noticing that like there's an aspect of like, oh, I'm scared to own that this feels very insightful for me, and it's also like there's a little bit of anger. It's like, oh, this is pretty obvious for me, and it's like, I hope, what is it? It's like I don't want to explain it. I'm noticing an agenda of like, oh, I don't want to explain this more. So I think I was like leaving my head because I was continuing to explain it more than I needed to.
Got you. And when you explain it, what is it that you, what I'm saying is, what do you think makes you explain it?
I like, it's not that I don't want to. It's like, oh, I've said enough, and this should make sense by now. And then if I continue to explain it, then
all right, cool. So you wanted to explain it, but then you kept going even after you wanted to. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I like that. For me, honestly, I see that as a similar thing in my meditation retreat. That was like I was just saying, like, it's about want over should. It's not about whether you're in jhana. It's not about whether you're explaining. It's about, do you actually want to explain right now? And so for me on my meditation retreat is like, oh, I actually wanted to be doing jhana meditation for 4 days. The 5th day, I didn't want to, but I was shooting myself. And then at the end of day 5, I was like, damn, those whole 5 days, I must have been shooting myself. But actually, it was only like 6 hours I was shooting myself, because I projected it onto jhana meditation instead of seeing the deeper thing, which would be like want versus should. Anything else on this thing for you?
Yeah, it feels like there's like so many agendas that I always have that I haven't admitted to, and one of those things that I've noticed is it's very vulnerable even to admit an agenda to myself, because once I've admitted the truth, I feel like I can be impacted a lot more. It's like when you have a mask on, when I have a mask on and I'm doing a thing performatively for people, and people don't like me for the performative thing, I don't feel like I can be hurt or heartbroken from people's judgments. But if I'm in my own truth, if I'm in my own agenda, and I've fully admitted that this is what I want and I don't get it, like the heartbreak is a lot more real and impactful. And the world has this ability to actually change me and have an impact on me in a way that's a lot more, like, not intense, but what is it? The world has a power to have an impact on how I show up the next moment, in comparison to if I have a mask on and I'm not, and then the world judges me.
To me, I'm translating that as like you're more intimate with the world and it has a bigger impact on you.
Yeah, there's a larger level of intimacy with the world, and it's scarier because I can't control. It's like the lack of control becomes even more apparent.
It's interesting. I hear and feel what you're saying, and I also feel right now, like, for me, the vulnerable part of admitting my agenda was that, like, I want to become more powerful by making this podcast. And it's, I feel the fear when I say that and admit that. And there's something that could look like a bracing for rejection in that, but actually it's more like if someone had rejected me for wanting power before that, I think I'd get so much more defensive than if someone literally like comments on this YouTube video and is like, that's disgusting that you want power. I can't believe you're doing that. Like, now that I've explicitly admitted the agenda, it's just like this, like, of course I want power. Like
there's more intimacy and there's also less to defend. I think both of those are true.
Then that's breaking my brain, even though it makes so much sense emotionally. Yeah, I'm like, I feel more scared. Like, I feel more scared and less threatened Like what? One way to think about it is like, I'm feeling my fear, so I don't need to defend against you activating my fear.
Oh yeah, that's so well put. I like think about that in like a 9-to-5 job. It's like the fear comes up when the job is threatened. Right? And then it's like you're gonna do everything to create this false sense of safety so that the job isn't threatened. And
you just totally made it click for me. Yeah, I totally see it now. Almost totally.
what do you
Ooh,
see?
it's like, it's like I shouldn't have to feel scared. Oh, okay, wait. Okay, so like death, maybe the biggest example. I want to. There's one level which is thinking that feeling safe and feeling the fear of death are incompatible. And then every time you feel the fear of death, which you're gonna fucking feel, every time you feel that, you try to control reality into trying to make it look different so that you stop feeling the fear of death, because you think that not feeling the fear of death is feeling safe. But when you see those things as not incongruent or contradictory, and they can coexist, and it's like, oh, I feel the fear of death right now and I feel safe. And now, before, if someone was like, hey Harry, you're gonna die, I'd have to like minimize it in some way and be like, yeah, but like I'm having a great time talking to my friend Samek, so I don't have to be afraid. But if it's like, oh Harry, you're gonna die, and it's like, oh yeah, that's scary, and like I don't need to control anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like what I'm noticing is there's like a lack of control and then a separation between safety and fear. While like the avoidance of fear, the act of controlling itself kind of proves to your system that it's not safe.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, I need to control things so that I am safe in the world, so that I don't feel fear means that there is something to be afraid of. There's something that's not safe. There's like you're creating something to protect, and in the act of creating something to protect, you're creating the sense of the lack of safety. While if I admit my agenda, if I feel the fear in the first place and feel the fear of the thing happening, there's nothing to protect because I already am feeling the fear. And in there being nothing to protect, there's more safety as a whole.
I've heard Richard Schwartz, the IFS guy, say there's some chapter in some book which is like it's called inner physics, like the laws of your inner landscape, your inner emotional landscape. And one of the laws is like nothing internally can hurt you unless you're afraid of it. In other words, the only thing to fear is fear itself. But I like Richard Schwartz's version, which is nothing internally can hurt you unless you're afraid of it. Yeah.
Would it be like afraid of it or like afraid to even look at it? The reason I'm saying that is like if you're afraid of it, but you're still looking at it and feeling the fear, I feel like it would be fine.
Yeah, I do think it's like avoiding the fear.
Yeah.
In the same way that it's like controlling. Yeah.
Speaking of Richard Schwartz, going back to you, Harry, I'm curious about the last 2 days of the retreat where you were like doing a lot more IFS than just jhana meditation.
Yeah, so day 5, slightly burnt myself out. I don't want to do jhana meditation anymore. There was this thing we'd do where we would like slightly guide each other in meditation. So I'd be like, oh, what are you feeling right now? And like, oh, what's pleasant or unpleasant about that? And like, oh, what shape is that feeling? Blah, blah, blah. We'd like guide each other a little bit. So one person guided me and it basically just turned into IFS. And I was like, oh my God, like I feel this. And then this part's scared. And then a part's scared about that part being scared. And it's just like, holy shit, there's so many parts of me that are terrified. And then I was like, oh, I can do IFS with Claude. So I looked up a prompt to do IFS with Claude, put it in Claude. I haven't posted that somewhere, but if you want that, like tweet at me or comment and I'll post it somewhere if you do that, because it's pretty banger. And I sent it to one other person and they already found it useful. I think it's great. But yeah, I just did like for the last 2 days, I just did like, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours a day of internal family system sessions with Claude. And it was awesome. And I appreciate it even more now because trying to do it after the retreat, like I noticed during the retreat how much energy and focus and presence and what a good container I had to do that. But literally like maybe 7 sessions in a row, I went in feeling like there's no way out. Like the part of me that wanted to escape and endure and get to the end of the retreat was so loud. Starting like 7 of those sessions in a row, like there's no way out. And then Claude, being a pretty skilled IFS therapist, in my opinion, just like reframing all the parts over and over of like, oh, this is how, oh, it looks like this part's trying to help you in this way. It's like, oh my God, this part of me wants to escape. And oh, this is part of me that's overwhelmed and it's ruining the whole process because now I can't work with the part of me that wants to escape. It's like, oh, it sounds like the part of you that feels overwhelmed wants like to lower the intensity. Like, do you want to ground yourself? And I'm like, oh, yeah, it just makes a lot of sense. Like, and that like a million times. And then I start doing that subconsciously and consciously, start doing that really quickly. And it's just like, oh, I literally, one thing I said to Claude at one point is like, there was 2 parts that were fighting with each other. And normally I see that, I'm like, fuck, there's internal conflict and I'm stuck. And this time having more space for that, it was like, there's like 2 girls fighting over me and they're like fighting over like which one of them gets to like love me the way they want to. Like this is like the easiest, best thing ever. Like I'm literally just watching 2 parts of myself fight over how they want to support me and like how they want to love me.
I really like that frame.
What the right way to do that is. And I was just like, wow, like what a gift to have like 2 parts that care about me that much that they're fighting over how to support me right now. Yeah, and it got to some like pretty deep stuff, and it got to like, you know, because also this is like day 6 and 7 of a meditation retreat, so I've been releasing all of the tension that I can. I've gotten out of all of the patterns that I could get out of in 7 fucking days of meditation, and so now we're at like the edge of my abilities. And now at this point, on the very edge of my abilities, I'm bringing in Claude and IFS. And so we're working with like stuff that I've basically never fully seen through before. And so to have Claude reframe that, and you know, every reframing is so simple, like, oh, you're overwhelmed, part of you wants to rest or get grounded. Like, of course. But to have Claude do that with the parts of myself I have the biggest blind spots in for the longest time, you know, like literally 15 plus years, is like so awesome and like actually very profound. And yeah.
How has that changed once the retreat's ended? Like in terms of like the level of internal alignment that you have?
Yeah. The most obvious example is like did a 7-day meditation retreat, you know, like no whatever TikTok or YouTube or TV, and then 2 days after just like watched like 6 hours a day of YouTube. Like, oh my God. And like, oh my God, this is so good. Watch the Severance season 2 finale right after the retreat. Also listening to music at the end of the retreat is like some of the most intense pleasure in my head I've ever experienced. It was awesome. I was like, if there was a drug that could do this, I would take it because this feels so good. But what I'm saying, at 2 days of like just watching YouTube all day, also Survivor, you gotta love Survivor. Also Counter-Strike, gotta love Counter-Strike. And then yesterday and today being like, oh, I like want to set boundaries. Like I want to get a bunch of like blocking software to like block YouTube, except for like an hour a day, et cetera, and on my phone, blah, blah, blah. And so many parts come up for me when I do that. There's like the whole story, but the quick version is like when I was 16, I really went like grind set, Tim Ferriss, Sam Harris mode. It's the exact same thing as the want over should thing. So when I was 16, I was like, I'm going to fucking improve myself. Like the story in my head was like, before I was 16, I played video games like 4 hours a day, Counter-Strike. I was good. Legendary Eagle Master, don't forget it. And then when I turned 16, I was like, fuck YouTube, fuck video games. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to work out. I'm going to do good at school. And then I was like, 21, 22. I'm like, why did I do that? That was dumb. This sucks now. And so I was projecting should onto all of those 6 years when only like one of those years was should. And actually like the first 3 to 5 years of improving myself, I actually just wanted to, and actually just felt awesome. Like it was actually just, it was so awesome. And then 1 year was like, I should improve myself just from the inertia. And I didn't notice that it switched to a should. And then I like slightly burnt myself out, just like on this meditation retreat. And I projected that the whole thing was should. And then I said, improving myself is dumb, or like jhanas are dumb. I'm never going to improve myself again. I'm never going to do jhanas again. And so like literally like yesterday, I saw through that and I was like, oh. And because the thing I did when I was 16 is like set boundaries with myself, like I'm just going to like delete Counter-Strike and not play video games anymore. And so here I was like, I can't set boundaries with myself because that's automatically shoulding myself. And then I was like, wait, I just want to set boundaries with myself. And like, it's okay if in the future I like remove those boundaries, but like right now I want to set boundaries with myself. I was like, oh, let me just do that. And then that felt so good. I gotta put this in the podcast. Right after my retreat, right after day 7, I went on a walk with my 2 roommates. One of my roommates did I'm going to assume he's okay with me saying this because it's hilarious. He did a Reiki session, which is like a light, non-invasive bodywork session. And at the end, I said like, oh, like, how do you feel at the end? Like, how did it impact your system? And he's like, yeah, I told her at the end, I was like, I feel like the Michelin Man. I was like, what? And I was so high after the meditation retreat, and it was so fun to talk to my friends. I was dying laughing for like 15 minutes. Like, it's like the hardest I've laughed since I was like a 13-year-old boy. It was so funny. But I do understand what he says, because setting the boundaries with myself, I felt so much more dense. I felt so much more integrated. I felt so much more in my body. I could even say powerful, but it's like a really grounded, natural filling up my body form of power. It's not like I'm powerful. It's just like, yeah. And so just setting those boundaries with myself is feeling so good. And there's a little part of me that's afraid that I'll rebel against them, and I probably will in the future. But I also don't have the thing that's like, oh my God, I need to set up the boundaries so that I never rebel against myself, or else I'm bad and then I'll be in the infinite cycle. So honestly, that's profound. And I'm so excited about it. Yeah.
Cool.
Shall we go back to you, sir?
Sure.
What's so right there's your like growth edge, but then there's like, I can sense what's on I can't see it, but I can sense just barely what's on the other side of the horizon. So like, what's on the other side of the horizon for you? And like maybe like a month. Like, what do you feel is the gift you're going to receive?
That's a great question. It's definitely the same, like around the same thing. It's around boundaries. It's around boundaries. And I think you mentioned this to me in the past, which is like, I learned that loving someone means that I can't have any boundaries around them. And I'm starting to see that in myself, where it's like, I'm noticing that when I feel like I like someone or love someone, and I admit that to myself, I shouldn't admit it to myself, because then I can't draw any boundaries with them. And there's this flip side to it as well, which is like, if someone loves me, then they can't draw boundaries for what I ask for them. So there's like this like a duality in that, where like one thing is protecting me from like, it's like my parents are saving me, and then I am like, what is it? I get to ask my parents for anything. And then the other side is like, oh, if I love someone, then I have to do the same thing. So having seen that pattern more and like setting boundaries with myself internally and saying no, there's this thing happening where there's a lot of fear in my system in terms of like, oh, I'm feeling a lot of more fear in terms of like, oh, I'm like, it's like I can die, I can like go homeless, and I might not be able to ask my parents for help in this scenario if like this bad thing happens. I'm like feeling a lot of that fear for the first time, and it's kind of overwhelming my system such that I'm like dissociating and like going back and forth between like touching the fear and dissociating. And at the same time, because the fear is there, there's less to protect, right? There's like, oh, yeah, they can say no, and I can say no. And it hasn't fully materialized, which is why, like, as I'm talking about it, I have no idea if I'm making sense. But there is an aspect of like that is slowly coming into view in a way that I like. And hopefully over the next few months, like it comes into a clearer view where like I can admit to myself that I like someone without fearing that I won't be able to hold boundaries with them. Seeing people who love me, quote unquote, like my parents love me, and seeing them as people who can hold boundaries, and then feeling the fear of like, oh yeah, they can say no to any of my requests, feeling the fear of that, hopefully like will shift my relationship with like my friendships and like women and honestly like everything. I'm like seeing the edge of that, like even the beginnings of that, where it doesn't fully make sense to me yet. And at the same time, I'm excited for how this will unfold over the course of the next month or two.
Yeah. I notice I'm defending against my fear of not making sense, and I'm defending against my fear of talking too much or not being focused enough on you. And I'm really loving this thing that we're talking about because I'm like, wow, this feels better. And something that comes up for me when you say that is the first time I got into Jhana 4 on the retreat, which is like this really deep piece. Again, it's not that extraordinary, but it's kind of like you're underwater and everything's really still. Like if you've ever gone underwater and just not moved at all and just like pretended you were dead, it's kind of like that, but in a good way. Well, yeah, that's kind of good. But the first time I got into Jhana 4, there was this really angry part of me, and it was just like, no. And it felt so good. And like I can feel a bunch of it now, but just I really felt and saw how how creating a boundary here that I actually want, like gives me this deep stillness and even safety, and gives the other person this deep stillness just by being like, no. And I fucking love that. Basically, it showed me how boundaries were inherently loving.
Yeah.
But it's almost even inherently bringing stillness and peace. Yeah.
It was funny because I was sitting, yesterday was overwhelming, the amount of dissociation I was feeling immediately after like seeing the pattern and the fear associated with it. And I just like sat there trying to like feel my feelings, and I just kept repeating, no, 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 no. And I just kept saying no. And then every time I said no, I felt a little more in my body, a little less dissociated, a little more grounded. And it's like you can't like I thought that loving someone was like not having boundaries, but like you can't love someone without boundaries, because then it becomes like there's going to be resentment, there's going to be codependence, and that's not love. Like it just can't exist without boundaries. So
I totally hear that point intellectually, and I'm curious, do you truly feel that?
Not yet.
Okay, cool.
No.
Because if you did, I'd be like, tell me, like, what is it like to feel that way?
I feel like this is the edge. Like this is the growth
that
we're both at, where it's like, oh, hopefully a month from now we get to a point where like boundaries and love becomes this thing that like work in tandem, instead of like boundaries and love being this like separate thing that don't fully like cohere yet. And I feel like that's like it kind of a growth edge for both of us. And for me, I'm like excited to navigate it, and there's a lot of fear around it because every time, like I'm like every time I've seen this pattern, there's like a shit ton of fear that comes up. It's like, oh, people can say no to this thing, people can say no about this thing, and like death becomes a thing that's closer to me as I'm playing with this. And it's interesting because as when I had a view conversation with Harry about this on Friday, he asked me like one question, or like, oh, what boundary would you draw with another friend of ours? And I answered it, and as I answered it, everything became like I'm gonna say non-dual, but everything became like
Yeah.
so much more like ethereal and big and magical. Like it was like love was there in with so much more power in my reality
Yeah.
when I just drew that boundary as Harry was asking me a question. And immediately after that, I fell into this like cycle of like feeling a shit ton of fear, because then I was like, oh yeah, other people can draw the same boundary with me, and I don't
Oh,
get this.
whoa. Yeah, I can understand that, and I don't really have that thing, but I can see how that would come up. That's interesting. Oh. But yeah, when that feeling for me, I would say like loving, grounded, and powerful, but also like maybe even generous. Like it just makes me think of a tree. It's
Yeah.
just really tree energy.
What do you mean by that?
Oh man. There's like the Giving Tree, like the book. But it's really, if you just imagine like a big, thick oak tree, it's just like, it's not gonna let me push it around. Like it's gonna fucking say no. But it's also not gonna yell at me. Like if I try to push it, it's just gonna be like, no. And then if I'm like tree, for me, a big part of this, like the love of boundaries is like meeting someone, like meeting someone. So like if I'm really angry and I want you to meet me, if I'm really angry at a tree and I want it to meet me, and I like shove the tree, like there's no way that tree's not gonna meet me. Like that tree's like, yeah, I'm fucking here. Like that tree's not fucking leaving. And that tree loves me, and that tree's grounded, and that tree is not gonna like bend over backwards for me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just all of that for me really embodies this feeling of like presence, love, boundaries, groundedness. But really like the tree sums it up for me.
Yeah. It's interesting how much more love there is when I'm able to hold that boundary. It's like immediate in my physical experience of reality. Um, and I had a principle that I was working with that completely changed. But at one point, one of my principles was be a tree and see other people
Mm.
as trees.
Whoa, cool.
And I think like there's like this beauty to like trees, or like, oh yeah, if you see other people as trees as well, like you see them
Dude,
as empowered, boundaried,
dude.
growing as they are, and I'm a tree growing as I am. I don't need to have an agenda for how I grow, and I'm boundaried and I'm strong and I'm here and I'm rooted in myself. Like I think trees are such a beautiful analogy for like not only spirituality and like this process, but also like as a way, like as a pointer back into myself.
I love that seeing other people's trees. That's awesome. I love that. Everybody, your homework is to hug at least one tree. But I don't mean like hug a tree. Like I mean like I need you to feel that this tree is like is a being. I want you to hug this tree and I want you to connect with it. And if you're like, Harry, it's just a tree, or Harry, I don't know how to do that, then assume you know how to do it, and assume that you're already doing it and do it.
Beautiful.
Report back. um,
Anything else for you,
shout out,
sir?
shout out to trees. Like
Yeah,
trees are so locked in.
they can't be any other way.
The last thing for me is that the reason I kind of like am interested in describing how this feeling feels to me is there's like love, which is like love and like love and like love and like love. But this tree flavor of it is like love. And I love that shit. And it's confusing to my brain because it's like really like love can be like love. Like really? It can just be like love. And so it shifts my definition of love, and I think a true and powerful way, but in a way that's still a little bit confusing to me. In the same way as seeing everyone as trees can be.
Beautiful.
Oh yeah. Anything else from you?
Yeah, this is I feel like this whole podcast is like a growth edge for me. And I'm really excited for, like, you said it and I was like, oh, I want to admit it as well. It's like, oh, I want this podcast to be a vehicle for becoming more powerful. And I'm noticing that it's like agenda. It's like, oh, I get to watch myself become more embodied as I'm speaking and like communicate in a way where I'm being vulnerable and not having anything to protect for the viewer, and also letting go of that idea that I need to make sense as I'm talking. Yeah. And also Harry can fucking point at me and ask me, it's like, so what's your agenda right now? As we're doing the podcast. And all of that makes me feel more embodied, more powerful. And I want the podcast to be that vehicle. And that is, I do have that agenda. And I'm like, Harry admitting that. It's like, oh, I also want to admit that.
Oh yeah. I'm going again, which is I totally feel the fear of not making sense. For me, there's also a fear of like, what if this turns into a should for me, like Jhanas did and like Improving Myself did. Yeah, so I just feel the fear of this possibly turning into a should for me. And that's it.
Yeah. And like I always say, we'll continue doing this for as long as we enjoy it.
That's our promise to you. Thank you, everyone.